Jim here. So I'm just going to give an update. And so in January, there was one hive here, and the goal was to have six around this time of year. Um, so what I did is I did one split uh, around April 1st on my original one hive that I have. And I also caught that one. It was a swarm that I caught. That was the only hive that I ended up with. I bought two packages the previous years, one each year. They all died out from diseases. They were not able to adapt to the viruses, the viral strains of this area that the varroa mites carried. And so, by catching that swarm last May, um, that one survived an infestation of varroa mites that I put upon them because I wanted to see uh, if they have the grooming technique going on, right? So um, I took the infested hive. I know this sounds crazy. I felt like I was nuts when I was thinking about it and then did it. And so the one that was dying of varroa mite infection, I put it on the swarm that I caught that had zero mites in it. For 3 months, no mites in that hive. I thought, I wonder if this is a groomer hive, right? So the one that was dying out from varroa mite infections and varroa mites loaded, I put that on top with a double screen board on top of the one that was not infected. And I waited, and the queen, she was dying, so I let her die. I took her out. She looked really sick, lethargic, and so I just merged the two hives, and it infected. Those mites ended up infecting that swarm pretty heavy. They were infected so heavy with mites, my original swarm, that I ended up having to put ApiGuard in there. Did lots of powdered sugar shakes on there, and but they survived the winter. And come January 1st, they were doing so well. They ate all that honey that they had. They probably had about 100 pounds of honey going into winter. They came and got me in the garage, let me know that they were out of food. So it took me 4 days to get that memo. And then once I realized what was going on, because they were bouncing off me in my garage was full of bees. They were circling me. It was like I was the wagon, and they were the Indians, right? And just tapping. Isn't that strange? And wouldn't leave me alone in the garage. So I fed them some. So I got the memo, and I fed them some. I gave them a jar, open feeding, and it only took a couple of minutes before they stopped swarming me, before they stopped, pestering me, because they can smell sugars 1 part per billion in the air. And so they disappeared out of my garage pretty quick once I gave them some sugar syrup. And so I kept giving them that sugar syrup through January, February, March, and came April 1st, when I popped that top, it was packed with bees. There was no room for another bee, frame to frame, from the bottom all the way to the top. So I went ahead and did a split, and um, but before I did that, probably a couple weeks before I did that, I had already put on another box because they were looking heavy already at that time. So anyway, I took that second brood box that I put on the top 2 weeks earlier, and I decided, well, she's either here or she's not here. So I put the top box on the right here, and eventually it was clear that the original hive no longer had a queen. So that queen had moved up in that second box and was up there laying eggs, but she'd already laid enough eggs down in the bottom box. So when I did the split, she was in the top box, and the original hive was without a queen. So they did an emergency sale. I didn't check on anything. I just watched over the weeks, right? And about 2 months later, they were both there was navigational flights coming out in both. 2 months later, 6 weeks, somewhere in there, 6 weeks maybe. So I knew that they had made a queen, right? So they were both queen right. And then I ended up catching a swarm a couple days later up in this tree up here. And then about 3 weeks later, or 2 weeks later or so, I caught another swarm in the front in a cherry tree in my yard. And then about 3 weeks later, I caught another one up in here again. So I ended up catching three swarms this season. So I went from one hive in April 1st to 1.6. But what happened was the first swarm that I caught, I was feeding them heavy because I wanted them to build out the comb, and I've done that many times. When I would do a split or something, I would feed them, you know, to build up the comb or something. What happened is when I took the sugar syrup away, they went frantic. They started killing each other. They were downsizing the hive. And so what I decided to do was to do a split on that hive. It was packed heavy. There was thousands of girls dead and dying and killing each other on the ground, on the landing board. So I went ahead and did that split. And then I was really being pestered a lot by bees. And the split that I made was pretty strong at first, but because there was because it wasn't strong enough, it just got weaker over time. And there was a Cronulla queen. I caught her over here and made sure that she belonged to the hive, and I verified that. She went off, she flew back out, and she went and got mated. I let her out of the little cage I had her in, and and then I verified about a week or so later that she had come back. And anyway, that hive, in that time that she was gone, had become so weak that it never recovered. But I had some sugar syrup out in the front. But it ended up happening, marauders started working their way in because it was a weak hive, and they would go in there and they were just keeping all the sugar syrup cleaned out. And so instead of adding some cap brood and more bees, I decided to let that one go ahead and let nature take its course. The queen was an amazing looking queen. Cronulla, black as night, whole body. And so yeah, so now I'm back down to 5, which is, for a backyard, that might be too much, because because I have houses that are just really close all around, 360, and there may not be enough resources for that many bees. I suspect there's a few other people that have beehives in the area. And so when we have that many bees in a small area where there's not much resources, then the only option is to feed them regularly, or they'll just die out. So what I've done here, I'll show you here. So I've got the 3 swarms that I caught this year. That's these right here. That's those, and those are all doing good. Now the one at the very end, that one was not doing so well for a long time. That one was just they were killing each other up until about a week ago. There was thousands of them coming out about a week ago. So what I decided to do was go ahead and start feeding them again, because I noticed that the frames in there were really light, so they must have used up all the honey, because there was more bees than there was forage. There was more bees than there were honey, and there was more bees that were waiting for me to feed them than there was foragers, and so there wasn't enough food. So eventually I ended up deciding to start feeding them, and so I'm not going to give them any more food until the 25th. So it'll be about 10 days. The first 2, they've been out since the 15th. of food, and so I want them to um, I want them to not be dependent on me feeding them, right? I created a welfare case, right? They were waiting for the food to come in the mailbox like a welfare check, food stamps, right? And that's not good. I created a bunch of jar feeders instead of foragers, and that's why they behaved the way that they did. Um, I couldn't figure out for the life of me what was going on because I've done that many times to many different hives, and I never experienced that happening. And so it's probably best to feed the bees intermittently, even in a dearth, right? To don't feed them constantly because they need that pollen. Um, also, they need that protein. Can't live on sugar alone, and so yeah, we need to be able to create a situation where they maintain the majority instinct of foraging, and I took that away from them. I was too kind. I was just too good of a guy. I worked too hard to make them healthy, right? Well, the main goal was actually for them to have plenty sugar syrup to build out the new comb that I made, put in there, the frames, and that was the main reason why I did it. But that particular hive had a negative effect of doing that, and so now I'm just want to maintain a certain amount of food in there, uh, and not make it so. And I want the vast majority of the bees, or at least the majority of the bees, to be foragers because they need that protein, need that kind of nectar that's mixed with protein because they get it out the flower and they're getting it on their mouth, and in their mouth their pollen is getting on it, it's getting mixed in, they get it into their honey sac, they pass it around and it becomes honey. And so they need that extra protein that's in the honey, right? And if we just give them sugar syrup, there's nothing in that. Maybe there might be a little tidbit from when a forager comes in and they pass that around, and so some of that foraging nectar gets mixed in with some of the sugar syrup. Not very much. I've seen it where those combs were pure white. There was no tannish look to it. It was just pure white sugar syrup, right? They dehydrated it enough to where they can pack it into a cell. So come fall, I'm going to give them 2 to 1. Um, Summer is probably best 1 to 1 because they need that moisture because it's hot, and they use that moisture to cool the hive. So you can see here, I've got this set up here, and sometimes that thing is just loaded when it's really hot. That has got so many bees in that thing. Oh my gosh. They grow, and they get in there and they get their butts sticking straight up, and yeah, and they like to go to. So once a bee discovers a certain spot, she will try to go in that same little groove every time. Um, and I've seen 2 battles. So 2 of them. This is my spot, and I've seen them battle. Get up and start battling each other in the air. And then one would win that battle, and they would go back down in that spot. And bees like to go to the same spot that they've already investigated and that they've already drank out of because they feel more secure to do that, to go to that same spot repeatedly on wherever the water is. And so that foam in there it's this foam that floaters. You buy those tubes and you get on them and you float in the water. I just bought one of those. I think it was at the dollar store. And I just cut it in strips, and what it does is it reduces dehydration. So I don't have. Before that, I was filling that thing every day. It was so hot. I was filling it because the sun hits it periodically, and the heat, and it just vaporizes out. Now maybe it's every 5 days I need to add a little water, and it'll actually last. Once I fill it up, it'll actually last for a week. Um, Before it actually starts to go dry where they don't have any water. Probably a week, if not longer. Those foam things act as really good, um, you know, dehydration reducing methods. So Okay, so just kind of an update. So I've got 5 hives, started the April 1st with one, and all the bees I have, I caught from swarms. I don't have any purchased bees. Uh, those all died out of local viruses. So all these bees, they've been here, right? Mostly, probably for who knows how long, maybe decades, right? And so they've adapted to the bromides and the bromides variants of viruses and whatever may be bacteria. And so they're all doing really well. Whereas the other bee packages that I would get from California, those were just a constant struggle just to try to keep alive, right? Just constant, constant. How you doing today? Oh my gosh, that's going on. So what I've done today is I pulled out 2 of the observation panels, and inspected for mites. And these 2 have about the same amount of drop every 24 hours, about 22 or so, which ain't too bad. On the one over here, about a week ago, I had 180 drop in a 24-hour period. That's a lot. But then the next day, it was about 70. And the next day it was about 40. And then it kept going down like that until about a week later from that 180, it was under 5. So what that told me, in all probability, is they got into grooming mode. Like today, I noticed that the mites had little chunks taken out of them. That's a sign of grooming. They're ripping them off, gnawing at them, trying to get them off each other. And that's the kind of bees we want. We want bees that clean each other of parasites and varroa mites and all that kind of stuff. And so that's the activity that I'm seeing on these 2 hives is self-cleaning, right? Self-grooming, grooming each other. And so I'll be observing that, waiting to see that. And now I don't have a mite problem with these last 3 swarms that I got. But there are mites in every box. I have the same setup on all these 5 hives. I've got a 1/8 inch hardware cloth screen system that I built, and I designed it so I can take this white sheet panel and take it out, put it under my microscope and see what's in there, right? And so and I can do that. Sometimes I'll pull them all every day, just to get a sense of a concern of any particular hive. I might do that 3, 4, 5 days in a row, just to see whether the mite count is coming down or if it's escalating. And if I don't see anything drastic going up, I'll leave it for 3 or 4 days. But I don't like to leave it too long because it's hard to see the mites when it's just packed with debris, because they're always rebuilding, reforming the cone in there, and they leave all these thousands of little bits of comb when they're either building out the frames or they're rearranging. Okay, now we're going to go from storage to laying eggs on this side, or vice versa. So there's always, within 3 or 4 days, there can be quite a bit of buildup of debris, and I can't see the mites. So what I'll do is I'll just inspect, 3 or 4 days in a row, so I have fairly clean sheets so I can actually see the count. Fairly clear. It's really clear with this little headlamp thing, magnifying thing. So that's kind of it. There hasn't been any other signs of swarming since about probably June, maybe 6th. I haven't seen any bees going into any of my baited nukes or investigating it. I haven't seen any marauders bouncing around the cracks, because the marauders are not always just marauders. What I've noticed with my area anyway, when I see bees bouncing off one of my hives, I go into swarm catching mode. Make sure I got some fresh lemongrass oil, no bugs in the baited nukes up in my trees. I go into action, because what I've discovered personally is that every time I've seen that happening, and I had a baited nuke out, I caught a swarm a few days later. So yeah, and I haven't seen any bouncing. So they're marauders, and they're also, when they're behaving like that, they may be marauders, but they're also looking for a home. At least what I've experienced with my area and what happens with the bees that are in my area. Um, and that's kind of it. Please subscribe, thumbs up, ring the bell, click the like, leave a comment, and all 5 hives are behaving normal. I had a Frankenstein hive. That one's now behaving normal. I had another brood box on top of that one on the end, and I think it was yesterday or day before, and I took that off because I felt my instincts were telling me that hive shrank itself so much to try to reserve resources that it no longer needed another brood box on top. So not only that, but the brood box that actually it wasn't on top. I had switched them. I put the empty framed brood box on the bottom. So what I did is I took that brood box from the bottom and I removed it. And I looked inside. They had done nothing to the comb. I think it was in there for like 3 weeks. They had done nothing to that comb. It looked exactly the same. Almost no comb on the frames in that brood box. So that told me that they downsized themselves to a more effective and efficient size hive. And the mites are low on all 3 of those. The mites are a little bit high on these. I'm monitoring them regularly. But I can see there's been a cycle where they go into heavy grooming. There's a lot of mites in one 24-hour period, and then the next day less, and the next day less and less, until it's like just single digits. And that's okay. That they're doing what they're supposed to do. There's a problem in here. You don't look too good. What's caught? Come here, let me groom you. They just, they take care of business, like nature's supposed to do it. And so I try to avoid adding any pesticides, whether it be oxalic acid, Apiguard, or all the rest, Formic Pro. I'm only going to use that stuff when I feel it's the last resort. And so I might smoke them with some oxalic acid maybe in September, and then watch and see what happens. And then if I don't see a good reduction, if the mite count is higher than I like, then I'll probably add some Apiguard. And that usually does a pretty good job. Last year when I added the Apiguard to the swarm I caught that I infected, I think I had like 950 count the next day. So they were heavily infected. And I did that. When we're curious, we make certain choices out of curiosity to see what would happen. It almost killed that hive. Yeah, I infected them. They didn't have any DWV, but they ended up with it after that. In fact, they had that hive. I infected with a DWV by adding that second infected brood box, and it was infected. It was infected for until I think mid-May was the last time I saw a bee with no wings. I haven't seen any bees with no wings since. So they were able to generate out through generations. The next generation, they were able to eliminate that DWV. And I've had DWV on all the hives that I bought from California, which has only been 2 over a 2-year period. Every single one of those ended up with DWV. So they had it before I got them. And then I infected the neighborhood. Well, I didn't. California beekeepers did. Right? So, yeah, they shouldn't sell bees unless they've been isolated with no varroa mites, no infections, they're clean bees. Then they should sell those packages, ones that have been verified to be varroa mite clean and DWV clean. Both of those purchases that I bought those packages of bees were affected. All right, so, all right, well, that's it. Good day.